Oh, that was quick. My name is Jambunathan. I'm Managing Director of SAP.io, SAP's business unit, which incubates and invests in innovation that strategically expands our ecosystem, helps entrepreneurs and startups build innovative software that delivers high value to our customers. And we're thrilled to have like a full house here this evening to hear about a very exciting topic that I think is enterprise and chatbots. When we look today, certainly in what's happening in enterprise, we see a confluence of a number of technologies, topics, and trends around the application of machine learning, the unlocking of siloed data, and the ability to process that information and bring it to users in their most convenient form to help them make decisions, to help consumers make decisions that's going to best help retain customers, bring new ones, and ultimately help enterprises grow, help business run more smoothly, more securely, and ultimately bring value to customers. So I'm excited that you're here with the Hive, with SAP.io. With SAP.io, just a brief word, we make investments in startups with the SAP.io fund. We also incubate startups at our SAP.io foundries located in New York, Berlin, San Francisco, Tel Aviv, and now in Paris. So if you're an aspiring entrepreneur who's thinking about how they want to build their business, please feel free to reach out to me after the talk. Would love to chat with you about how SAP can help you become wildly successful. So thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to Ravi.
Thank you. So just about a year back, we had an event in San Francisco at Verizon, this was an event where we didn't even open the invitation. It was a private invitation so that we could get only women. And so we had about 150 women and kind of a bunch of speakers. So I'm incredibly pleased today to first welcome you all and for this great panel discussion on enterprise chatbots. A lot of people think 70% of the front office jobs, where people are interacting with people in sales, support, service positions will be gone in the next 5 to 10 years. And those jobs will be handled with autonomous agents and enterprise chatbots. So I'd like to first thank SAP Ram and SAP.io for hosting us. And to host tonight's event, I'd like to introduce an advisor to the Hive, Odile Roujol. So just a brief introduction of Odile. Odile has had a kind of a dream job. If you were to write your resume, you would write Odile's resume. She was president of Lancôme, a L'Oreal part of L'Oreal, and decided to make a pivot, a change, which was really a kind of a view into the future. She became the chief data officer of Orange, the telco, and she started a career at Chanel as a product manager. And so today she's a kind of a mentor, advisor to a whole number of startups, a lot of women founded startups, and the Hive. I'd like to introduce Odile.
Thank you, Ravi. I'm humbled by his words, and I'm thinking now that he has said that, I don't have the high heels because I didn't know if the parking was a huge one, so I apologize not to be with the image of the luxury. It's a pleasure to have you tonight, and it's a real honor to introduce this meeting. I forgot my little sticker thing to move things, or someone took it. It's here. So I will say that Ravi is very humble, but he does a great work with the Hive as a co-creation studio and fund for AI-powered companies. I think you know it because you're part of it. Their database are now more than 9,000, and I'm pretty sure if you're here tonight, you're here to learn for life and you continue to listen to great speakers, and we will have great speakers tonight. It's 180 events that have been led by the Hive think tank on leadership forum on AI and on enterprises. 280 speakers, and I think since 2013, 10,000 people have attended the events. So thank you to the sponsor, especially SAP tonight. And by the way, if for any reason you want to help us to continue great events such as organized tonight, please contact Ravi or get in touch with us. So they invest in many verticals, finance, insurance, banking, industrials, and health, and all the part of the companies. That means sales, marketing, finance, customer relationships. So tonight we will be more about chatbots, conversational agents, AI and machine learning, and we will have great speakers that I would like just to introduce with the super amazing moderator. Oana, Elisa, Olteanu, she's working for SAP. She's a woman in tech, and I'm very honored to introduce all of them tonight because in a way or another, you know that we've got cognitive biases, and I think in a way a woman needs to raise their voice, and I'm so happy to have you tonight to welcome Oana on stage. Thank you. Please, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Tonight, it is my distinct pleasure to moderate an all-women panel on enterprise chatbots. I myself have a background in machine learning. I was doing that at university in Germany back when it was not cool. It's very nice that now there's lots of startups who are coming for investments. For us, I'm currently working at SAP IO on the investment side, and I'm seeing a lot of the machine learning technology applied, especially for chatbots. With that, I would like to invite the amazing panelists on stage. And well, I hope tonight you will benefit from this panel. That's my So we're thinking of, we'll start with a round of intros, and then at the end, maybe reserve some time for the questions. With regards to chatbots, myself was responsible for the partnership strategy of SAP in this space and executed deals with significant companies in this space. With that, I would like to hand it over to Tessa. Please introduce yourself.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Tessa Price. I am on the business development team at Slack Technologies, where I focus on our platform partnership efforts. So by that, I mean companies that may be interested in building an app, bot integration of some sort on our platform. Previous to Slack, I spent a few years at Box in both sales and partnerships as well, and then took a brief hiatus in LA where I worked at a very small company called Vessel, which was a video subscription service that was eventually acquired by Verizon.
Great. Hey everyone, my name's Arushi, and I'm a machine learning engineer at Cisco via acquisition of MindMeld. So at MindMeld and now Cisco, we are working on building natural language processing pipeline to build production level conversational interfaces and chatbots. And previous to MindMeld, I completed my master's from Stanford as well as my undergrad from Stanford as well, focusing on AI and machine learning.
I'm Merrielle Spain. I'm a product manager at Google Cloud AI. I specifically work on the platform, so if you know ML Engine, I work on that. I also did PhD work in computation and neural systems, so ML before it was cool. And then after that, I applied ML to security at MIT Lincoln Laboratory.
Thank you very much. I don't know, for those who are new to chatbots, maybe it's worth an introduction. So with that, I would like to ask Arushi, for those who are new to chatbots, what are they? Why should enterprises know about them?
Yeah, so chatbots are conversational interfaces that understand natural language, like English, well enough at least to complete a request and to respond back to you as if you're having a conversation with another human. I think there's a little bit of a connotation for chatbots to be more typed text-based inputs, but I think voice assistants like Siri and Alexa are also chatbots as well. But for both speech and text, I think it's important to realize that while natural language is very easy for us to communicate as humans, it's actually incredibly difficult to train a bot to understand unstructured text. So that's why a lot of our current interactions with technologies are based more on swipes and button clicks, very structured inputs. And I think AI has now gotten to a point where we can start interacting with technology in a very, very free-form way. And I think with that sort of interaction, that opens up a whole new set of use cases that can really benefit from this type of interaction. And I think it's important for enterprises to realize that these chatbots are not just kind of a fun gimmick to play around with at home, but they're also something that could really add value and help streamline tasks in the workplace.
Thank you. Merrielle, what do you think, besides the new user interface, is there something new to bots that they allow us to do?
One thing that's new is that they work. So these sorts of technologies have been around for a while. It's that the new progress in AI has really enabled things that we weren't able to do before. So for instance, within the last year, I called up my baby's pediatrician to schedule an appointment because he was sick. And it went something like this. Please say the name of the department or person you wish to reach. Pediatrics. I'm sorry, please say the name of the department or person you wish to reach. Pediatrics. Please say the name of the person or department you wish to reach. Pediatrics. I'm sorry, thank you, goodbye. So not exactly the customer experience that you want. So I would say what the new technology enables is these customer experiences to actually go through in a way that's fast. The user no longer has to go through a bunch of menus in order to get to the solution they want. It gives freedom to the consumer. They're able to interact in the natural language way that's delightful, as Arushi was saying. And if you look at the statistics, like 60% of consumers say what they want is not interacting with a human, it's better self-serve customer service experience. And this is especially true for millennials. Okay, so if you take this freedom together with this speed, and you think about who it can really impact, you can think about accessibility. Like, what about somebody that has trouble seeing or trouble hearing, or it's difficult to move their hands in a very controlled manner? Like these changes, if the chatbot you have or conversational agent is in the right modality, this can really change people's lives. So in a short way of saying it, they work in a way that they were just people would click 000 before to escape, and now they can actually solve people's problems efficiently.
Interesting. Tessa, do you see companies adopting chatbots, especially in the enterprise world? I mean, I know Slack is used by many companies, and
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we are seeing a lot of chat adoption on Slack, and even more so, like companies wanting to build bots themselves. I think that's for a few reasons. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of hype around bots right now, and so I think a lot of people are wanting to kind of explore what that means. Sort of a side note to that is how much productivity gains can they have, and sort of how much time can be saved, money can be saved by using something like a chatbot. So those are all conversations that we're having of reasons why people are interested in exploring them in sort of large enterprise capacities. I think we're seeing a ton of different workflows. There's really no recipe. We're seeing some that are very, very lightweight, and then some that are much more robust, some that are super social, and some that are much more productivity focused. For our sales category, for instance, on one side of the spectrum, Pipedrive built a deal bot, and essentially it's fairly lightweight. It's a great introductory bot for sales teams, and what it does is it pipes in notifications into a channel of your choosing, and essentially notifies AEs whenever a deal progresses from negotiating to closed won. And so it's very, very simple, but essentially then people can converse with that bot to say like kudos, congrats, there's a build and team morale, things of that nature. And then on the other side, like really, really, again, robust workflows from like Gainsight Sally or Totango Zoe, they've built bots that you can ask within Slack about deal updates, renewal dates, total account values, what customer support tickets are attached to what accounts, NPS scores, et cetera. So again, just creating sort of a very integrated experience within Slack that eliminates context switching and just really increases visibility, and that's appealing to a lot of people. So we're definitely seeing people that want to check what that's about.
Yeah, to add one more use case, right now at Cisco, we're working on building a voice assistant chatbot for meeting rooms. And so with that, we're kind of directly integrating with Cisco's hardware that already exists in meeting rooms around the world. And we're trying to add a conversational interface to that and additional functionality to help facilitate meetings and allow you to control those devices with your voice. So I think like in a lot of cases where you kind of walk into a meeting room and you're just trying to start a conference call, you have to open your laptop and you have to pair to a device and you have to either pair or connect a cable, and then you have to type in all the numbers and pound signs, and then you're finally connected to the conference call. But with this, we're trying to eliminate all those intermediate steps. You can just say, hey, Spark, start my call for me, and you're connected right away. And so we hope that that'll be helpful to streamline efficiency in the workplace.
Speaking of hoping, can we talk a bit about adoption? What are some drivers or hurdles to adopt the chatbots besides just the let's check it out, really adopt it and use it day to day?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors for adoption. One area that I think is particularly important for enterprise adoption is reliability, that chatbots have to be consistent enough and work on the first time and do what you're expecting it to do. Because when you're working on a work-related mission-critical task versus when you're at home and working on or just asking for a more leisure-type activity, then the fail cases are different. For example, if you're in the workplace and you ask your chatbot to share some slides, if those slides get sent to the wrong person, maybe that person doesn't even have the clearance to see the information that's on that slide. That's a much bigger fail case than if you're at home and you're asking a chatbot to play a song and it plays the wrong song. So yeah, I think kind of the accuracy bar for adoption is much higher in the workplace.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's super critical. And sort of along those lines, one thing that I always suggest to companies that are thinking about building a bot is having a really good onboarding experience. It is something that is so often overlooked. Like you have 5 to 10 seconds, like when you're first interacting with the user, to like introduce the bot, explain its purpose, and maybe give like 2 to 3 explanations of what it's capable of. And for someone that may not be as technically fluent, that is critical. If they don't understand how to move forward, if they don't understand what this bot is and what it does, they will disengage completely. So it seems like a very easy thing, but it's really, really important to get that perfect.
Does picking the right use case play a role in that? I mean, how do you pick what should be transformed into a bot?
Yeah, definitely. I think picking the right use case is key, because as you start narrowing down your use case, you can achieve higher model accuracy, because you can really focus on that domain-specific data and domain-specific knowledge and tune all of your machine learning models to that domain. But at the same time, your use case needs to be broad enough that it's actually useful and that it simulates a real-world human interaction. So the perfect use case is kind of that sweet spot where you have both high accuracy and high value proposition. And I think it's important to kind of find that balance.
Interesting. Merrielle, can you tell us a bit about deployment challenges, especially in the enterprise? Thinking here, out-of-the-box experience versus customization, ontologies.
So some challenges with deploying to enterprise are getting the AI right. So if you don't get the AI right, then all bets are off. You're essentially throwing your money down a hole. The second thing is making sure that the bot is appropriate to what you're trying to do in terms of things like personality. If you're going to put a personality in, it's going to be different for Lancôme than, say, for a bank or a medical center. And then a third thing is integrating with existing systems. For instance, if a business has lots of SAP systems, how do you integrate the bot with those existing workflows? And actually, Google decided to have Dialogflow be a platform because of that, all that system integrator needs that exist in order to make bots fit in with existing workflows. And so in terms of customization, 100% of our bots are customized. It's about a 15-minute setup time.
Tessa, do you see different tools that people use to develop these chatbots that live in Slack? Since Merrielle mentioned customization, are some emerging tools that people are using?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have like the foundational elements of like open APIs, which is something Slack has had since the beginning. Which is kind of our bread and butter, but we absolutely do like point to sort of recommended like open source libraries that are widely adopted. If someone's having trouble with NLP, we can point to like Google's API.ai. You know, if someone just wants a dev shop to build the bot like completely, we also have those service providers and folks that are like very Slack specific. Robots and Pencils is an example there. But we absolutely do have sort of like recommended tools and partners like within that space. How they sort of monitor them and analyze them, I mean, it's a little bit early days. Like we were talking before, and like there are chatbots that monitor chatbots, so it's getting a little bit of an inception model. But we also have a ton of people that want to monitor like how much like time is this going to save me? How much money is this going to save me? People that do surveys to determine NPS scores. So like we have a lot of bots in Slack that like after the bot experience finishes, it's like thumbs up. Was this good? Was it not helpful? Did you get the answer you needed? Did you not? Et cetera. And that's really good information like pushed back to the developer where they can like get that much more data to improve the experience overall.
Is there a consistent methodology that you maybe saw, Arushi, that has emerged for developing chatbots?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've been able to consistently build production-level conversational interfaces by following a methodology that has started to become sort of an industry standard. So at a very high level, there's 3 broad categories. One is data collection. You have to collect high-quality data, both domain-specific metadata, like vocabulary that's specific to your use case, as well as conversational data, which is the actual natural language of what a user might say, and labels for that data. The second is actually building the application, which is all of the machine learning models in a type of framework and processing pipeline to understand what the user is saying, what the intent is, what are some key phrases in that query, and then generate a natural language response as well as fulfill that request maybe with an API call. And then the third broad category is model improvement. So this is that once a bot is launched and in production, I think also to what Tessa was saying is that you get those user logs as well as feedback from those logs, and you can add that data back into your training data so your model continues to learn and develop and become better over time.
And speaking of data, how do you get the data? Because
so in terms of domain-specific metadata, a lot of times that's available either publicly or within your company and org. So this is things like a database of restaurants and dishes that are at that restaurant, or a database of clothing items, and domain-specific vocabulary, similarly, that can be scraped or found online. In terms of conversational data, I think this is the big component that's lacking right now. That doesn't, there's not as much publicly available conversational data. So this is something that's often crowdsourced. So you can use tools like Mechanical Turk, Crowdflower, et cetera, to generate natural language queries, and then also use similar tools to get those annotations or those labels for those queries. And once you then launch your app and it's in production, you have a much cheaper way of getting those conversational queries because you can use user logs when those are available. But generating the labels for those queries are still expensive. So you can use active learning techniques to select the queries that your models are most uncertain about and choose to label those.
Interesting. Merrielle, what have you seen, speaking of AI, how do you make the bot smarter? What can you do to improve the model?
Well, so there's definitely been a theme in the last few pieces of the conversation. So Tessa and Arushi both mentioned like closing this loop of having feedback on your examples. So what we've really found is in this domain, supervised learning is the way to do it, not unsupervised learning. And so you really need a lot of high quality data. And when you have uncertainty about certain items or when you have feedback that something went wrong, you really need to be able to figure out what the right response would have been and get that back in to improve your performance. And so Dialogflow, which API.ai became Dialogflow, has something called Chatbase that enables you to do that labeling.
So when it comes to bots that are not so great, maybe they couldn't get smart, do you see some of those Tessa in Slack also? And if so, is there an emerging pattern of why they are not so great?
Yeah, I mean, we do see those from time to time, absolutely. And I think people disengage with bots for the same reason like any of us would. And you know, that's mainly if the bot is confusing or if it's not helpful. I mean, I guess that can be applied to a lot of things, but what we see is like if someone's approaching a bot and they just don't really know how to move forward, or you know it's a blank canvas and they don't really know even what question to ask, that's a non-starter. And so we do have some best practices that we sort of like recommend to folks in that situation. One is that I think there's this idea in the industry right now, maybe because of like assistant type mentalities of bots, that they have to just be reactive and they can't be proactive. And we really think that that's not the case in Slack. Some of our like most popular bots are ones that are like piping in notifications. So your website went down, you went over your marketing budget, you know, you got a customer support ticket from like your most important client or what have you. And that really can like start the conversation, and you can like build the bot sort of like life cycle from there. But you know, it's really hard to get a user to like remember to install the bot, then to like go to the bot like on whatever messaging platform they are, then ask like the appropriate question that the bot can understand. Like you really, really have to like provide that information that kicks off the workflow. We've seen that be like really, really powerful. And actually Arushi was mentioning this earlier, but it doesn't just have to be like text-based either. I think voice is like a really, really like interesting area. And then on Slack, we have a ton of API features like buttons and menus, you know, text inputs, et cetera. So maybe instead of having like your user type yes or no to certain questions, you can just provide buttons that are like green yes, red no. And it sounds so silly, but those really, again, like keep the conversation moving, keep people engaged. So when they get lazy or confused, they just like sort of rely on that navigational like memory, and it's something they're familiar with from like websites and mobile apps to just like move forward.
Does personality play a part of it? A bot being great versus not so great? Do bots even need a personality? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I am of the opinion that they do. You know, I think we all love when Siri is like a little sassy or, you know, responds to a question in an interesting way. It builds rapport, it builds trust, like it keeps you engaged. Like there's a lot of reasons why personality is important. And at Slack, we try and take that one step further by, you know, even talking with the partners around like, okay, like what pronouns do you want this bot to use? Like what skin color emojis do you want this bot to use? Like really make it human, like give it an identity. So I think personality is important, but Merrielle's correct that like, you know, getting the flow right and the AI right like trumps personality. You can have the funniest, kindest bot, but if it doesn't work or if it doesn't give you the answer you need, like, you know, no one cares if it has like good behavior.
And I would say it probably depends on the application. Like for instance, if you want the bot to call you a lift quickly, it doesn't really necessarily need to be sassy. I just want the interaction to go quickly and not have to think about it.
Speaking of the application, what are a majority of bots that you have seen in terms of use cases? Are some verticals more crowded than others? For example, in investing, I see a lot of startups that look for money and they are doing chatbots for customer service. Have you seen such patterns emerging?
So retail is one space where you see a lot of bots. Like for instance, go to any store that you shop on online, and I'm sure after you click around on a few pages, you'll see a bot come up and offer to give you help. So that's one instance. Financial services is another place. If you're calling after hours, or even if you're calling during hours, business hours, you're likely to get some sort of conversational agent.
What do you think about healthcare? And would you like to chat with a bot about your healthcare?
Well, so sometimes getting an appointment can be difficult with the bots I've interacted with. I think that for healthcare, it could be reasonable to interact with the bot if you have a feeling that things are secure. But some people might not feel that that's secure. On the other hand, if you're talking on the phone with a provider, then you have a person looking at your files. So either way, there's some possibility for leakage of information.
So then how do you ensure that the bot is secure and the data stays private? Because I think that's one of the biggest concerns, especially on the enterprise side.
So medical is interesting because, for instance, if I'm calling up to ask about my medical records, then HIPAA compliance needs to be reached. So there are specific things that have to happen in terms of security and also making sure that I am who I claim to be, so authorization and authentication. So those are important to meet, and a lot of systems will give you those sorts of compliance. In terms of, but there are also, if you're talking about customer privacy in general, so not necessarily consumer, but business customer, then it depends on what product they're going to use, what sorts of guarantees they're going to get. So I'm at Google. Sometimes people love Google and have amazing experiences with our products. There are also people that don't love Google and say, oh, Google, they're collecting my data, big brother type thing. Also, the split for Dialogflow is such that there's Dialogflow Standard, which is our free offering, and that comes with the Google API standard terms of service. And then there's also Dialogflow Enterprise, which debuted a couple of months ago. And that has the Google Cloud Platform specific terms. And so the terms for that are that your data is only used in order to provide the service itself. It's not used for anything else. So being able to provide those sorts of guarantees are important for people regardless of whether the application is HIPAA regulated or not.
Then let's say the bot is secure, data is private. What sometimes happens is the bot forgets what you told it before, so it has like a short-term amnesia, which gets some people very angry, and then they end up not using the bot anymore. Why is that? And can you talk a bit about the bot memory, maybe Arushi, from a development perspective?
Yeah, so I think as you said, memory is important in any conversation because you can't just focus on the current dialogue. You have to have some knowledge of what the conversation was up until this point. I think currently the way that this is implemented in a lot of bots is by using dialogue states. So you can store certain bits of information in dialogue state memory that's decided by the developer that may be important for a future dialogue, and then that can be referred in future time. But to your point about kind of forgetting that memory, all of that dialogue state is kind of happening on the device and doesn't have to be synced back to the cloud. So you don't necessarily lose that session, even if you are having a completely secure and on-premises bot that's running. And I think that more long-term, as we start moving to more deep learning methods, we can start to have a more implicit memory state that's learned by just keeping track of all of the conversational text in these kind of hidden state vectors. And then we can use attention mechanisms to pinpoint which points in the conversation that the current dialogue is referring to. But that is slightly less deterministic, so I think people have stuck to more of the dialogue state method so far, and it also requires much more training data. So as we get more training data, we'll probably start moving more towards that model.
So then, let's say SAP gets some bots and we deploy them. Does that require a lot of change management usually on the customer side? Do you even need some analytics or special monitoring tools then?
No, go ahead.
I think the way that we've built bots in the past is we've always integrated them directly into an existing application. And so the deployment process is no more than a software update that any other feature would take to deploy. In terms of analytics and monitoring, I don't think that it's a blocker to deployment, but I think it's incredibly useful if you do have that available, because then you can know exactly what types of queries users are asking. You can determine certain fail cases that are coming up over and over again, and you can really identify new features that you want to add based on things that users are saying that you don't currently support. So I think it can really help tailor your chatbots and your models to what users are looking for.
Yeah, I agree with that. The only thing I would tack on is when we have deployed chatbots in certain Slack instances to like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users, like there is a massive sort of change management flow that has to happen to all the things Arushi said, and then also things that are like no fun, like policy, documentation, sometimes like even just like reorgs, depending upon how powerful the bot is and sort of like what role it plays. So that's definitely what we've seen inside of Slack, and obviously, of course, too, when you're like going to a retail site, and if it's an externally facing like chatbot that's reaching millions of people, like it's absolutely going to change the way that like people deploy things and how much time and attention they're spending on it.
Then once they're deployed, how are they being discovered? How do you discover bots? And I mean, on Slack, I think you have, 300, 400. How do I find out about it?
Yeah, so it's early days. I think that there's a lot of ways we can improve here. It's kind of uncharted territory. And Slack is somewhat in its infancy. But the main ways that like apps and bots are discovered right now on Slack is absolutely through our directory, so slack.com/apps, similar to like a store or iOS or Google Play, et cetera. Folks can go in there and search for keywords, stand-up, Scrum, what have you. We also have categories and curation, so there's ways to like spotlight and feature bots and apps that we think are really, really solid. And we have over 20 categories there of like verticals, sales, marketing, HR, and actually over like 1,300 integrations at the moment that are like public and sort of out-of-the-box solutions. So that's a huge driver of just like pure installation. And then we recently added in product something called App Space. So for those familiar with Slack, on the left-hand side, you communicate with people. It's your DMs, your private channels, your public channels. And then at the bottom left-hand corner is something called App Space. So that's for the apps that are installed within Slack. You can kind of go and revisit those conversations, see what is sort of allowed within your workspace. And so that's less so on like discovery and more on like rediscovery and re-engaging once you've sort of started a conversation.
And are the majority of these bots free, or can you talk a bit about monetization?
Yeah, so it absolutely depends on the platform. I was just having a conversation the other day with a messaging platform that's much more consumer and like social focused. And they were like, what about, ads and bots and in-product promotion and selling goods and, data and selling that, et cetera. And I don't think that's the way that Slack is going to move. I really think that we're going to be fairly focused on like traditional enterprise licensing models. So like bot first, Slack first, I will provide this service for, this amount of people for this amount of money for this amount of time. So definitely subscription. We're already seeing sort of some companies beginning to experiment in that way on Slack and do fairly well. So I think we'll probably continue down that line, and then down the road, obviously, we would love to find a way to like distribute more software via Slack, but it's early days, more to come there.
And when it comes to the future, what hopes do you have for chatbots? Maybe we'll start with you, Merrielle.
So the future, well, to keep performance going up and up and up, that's certainly a hope for the future. And also, I mentioned the accessibility thing before. If this can really change people's lives that have a hard time interacting and getting what they need right now, I think that is a wonderful thing for the world.
Yeah, I agree. I think that being able to interact with technology in a hands-free way can open up a lot of new use cases. Even in kind of a work environment, if you're like a chef or a surgeon or a construction worker and you're busy with your hands, but you still need to interact with technology, using your voice, that's a very clear way to do that. I think also as with kind of the rise of the Internet of Things, as you have more and more distributed devices all around you, a lot of which don't have screens or keyboards or more traditional ways of interacting with them, I think interacting with these devices with your voice can be incredibly useful. And also, kind of more on the technical side, I think as people start using more and more conversational bots, we'll start having enough data that we can move away from more hierarchical pipelines of machine learning models into more kind of end-to-end training and start using more deep learning approaches, which I think can improve the capabilities of what chatbots can do.
Yeah, I think the future is bright. I think there's a lot of skeptics out there right now about chatbots and sort of how efficient they are and productive. But once we collect more data, get more AI, NLP improves, and then we also qualitatively trial and error and get customer feedback. Bots are going to make leaps and bounds, strides. So I'm really, really excited. Are there areas of improvement? Absolutely. Discovery, monetization, domain-specific bots. The list goes on. But Slack's a believer.
Discovery, it sounds like we need a bot for finding bots.
Yes, Inception again.
I think at this point it would be nice to open it for some questions from the public, if there are some questions. Yes?
Grab some microphones.
Hi, I'm curious how the competitive landscape looks like for chatbots and how are different companies viewing different companies or different enterprises, sort of cooperation and competing, because it looks like there's a lot of cooperation. There's no dominant player. Like there's Amazon with Alexa, Siri with Apple. So where do you see this going?
So Google's approach to this with Dialogflow is to have that available as a platform. And so we've got hundreds of thousands of developers on Dialogflow, and the idea is that our partners are the ones that actually go and sell and integrate with customers.
I'm optimistic. Slack is very pro being open. I mean, we have integrations actually with Cisco products and with Google Drive and SAP actually. So we're very much about bringing those, even those that are considered competitors in some capacity, into our platform and just giving the customer the best experience possible.
Yes, and for SAP, it's all about reaching the customer where the customer is. So if our customer is using Slack, he should be also able to access an SAP system from there. If they are using Facebook or Microsoft, they should have the choice. So we're very open in that direction.
Yeah, I think there's also a lot of collaboration with multiple technologies working together even within one chatbot. Like someone might use Google for ASR and then Amazon for text-to-speech and then have their own platform in the middle. And I think right now, because it's still kind of early in the technology development cycle, there is a lot of room for that collaboration because you just want the best product out there versus competing for that kind of space.
See there, green hoodie.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation, ladies. My question in terms of the customer experience, we're building chatbots for insurance, and what we've noticed that as we train our model based on the real human conversation with the support, with the agents, once people discover it's a chatbot, they speak differently. So it looks like people are really trying to screw around with the bots just because it's not a real person on the other side. And but first of all, the question is, have you guys experienced something like that? The way we figure out to deal with it is not to tell it's a chatbot until they actually understand it. But this way we are managing to keep the conversation civil, right? So there's no questions which are 100% not related to the value that we're trying to provide or to the workflow that essentially chatbot is trying to lead. Thank you.
So I think what you're asking is, can we pass the Turing test? and stop them from knowing that it's a chatbot. I think that people debate it one way or another. So if you can keep it good enough that people don't know, then you can avoid this kind of behavior. But I think all of us, once we know we are interacting with a machine, we will start changing our behavior. Just like how we interact with one person, our behavior might be different than if we interact with a different person.
Yeah, I agree. And I do see that once people know it's kind of an AI, they try to break it. They try to use as complex queries as possible to try to see how good can it be, like what's the breaking point. But I think that as users, people are more forgiving if it doesn't pass the Turing test, if it doesn't answer every single question completely, as long as it answers the questions that are for your given use case well.
So I find it irritating when chatbots are trying too hard. Do you guys have any special technologies in place to detect that the question is out of scope? That you can't handle it?
Yeah, so.
You train for the case of other, that's what I'm saying.
Yes, yeah, we do. So I guess kind of at the model hierarchy, the first step is domain classification. So whether is this a query that's for food ordering, is this a query for playing music, or is this an other domain, unsupported domain? So we do that, and then we try to respond back for those unsupported domain queries with something like, sorry, we don't support that right now, here's a funny joke, or here's something that we do support. So try to come up with a response that's still okay, but that lets the user know that that's not supported.
One best practice that we've had a lot of folks do at Slack is a /command help. So when they're interacting with a bot, like no matter what bot they're interacting with, we try and get them in the habit of like doing /command help, so that bot can respond and say like, just so you're aware, again, like here's like my name, here's my capabilities, like, and here's what I'm able to do. Essentially just re-educating the user. So if they do ask something that like multiple times that the bot may not understand, the bot can then say, please ask for help. So it's not a solve all, but step in the right direction.
I think there was a question there.
Yeah, thanks for a great conversation. I had a question about whether the focus of most of these, let's say, voice-based bots is for the front office, or whether there are use cases which are really meant for the back office. Like, you've heard about the Alexification of the enterprise, but like, for example, in analytics, like if a user doesn't know SQL, would they be able to kind of interact with a data hub and be able to specify the query that they want without actually talking SQL, like, you know, show me sales group by zip code, like on a zip code basis. So are there any use cases which are kind of more focused on those kind of use cases, which people sometimes call the Alexification of the enterprise?
So I think that things are definitely going in that direction. A lot of the use cases right now are front office.
I've seen, however, on the investment side, several startups who are approaching this analytics space, and that's what they are preaching. For example, if you're an account executive on the road to meet with a customer, you don't need to call somebody in the analytics department who knows how to write a query and get you the data. You can just tell the bot what was the amount of software bought last year, for example. So definitely that's something we're seeing more and more coming.
I just wanted to know, what are your key takeaways from recent news when chatbots became cool, like Microsoft, that the Twitter bot turned racist? What do you do with that information?
So one thing you can do is think about where your failure states are going to be with your machine learning. So like, for instance, if you have a deep neural network, you can't explore the whole space to know what can happen. Like if your bot is like accidentally like racist or something else horrible is going on. But if you can have some guardrails on the system, or have some other way to do verification and validation to know where things are going wrong or where you have low confidence because you haven't seen data that is highly related to what you're seeing now, and like maybe pull the plug or respond that this stuff is out of scope.
Yeah, I just wanted to go ahead and answer the back office bot question, like front office versus back office. We are decision engines, and we focus on the back office bots. And that's where, like use cases like where there is a contract for approval, and there are risk analysts who are analyzing the contract. Then the bot can help them in extracting the clauses which are relevant for them, so which helps in decision making there. So a lot of back office bots will come into picture. In future, you will see from us and many other companies as well.
Wonderful. We've had a startup pitch as well. Maybe now a question.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks for a great talk. So we heard a lot about the deep learning and attention models, and people do argue that attention is all you need. From what from the practice, what we have seen was these work very well for retrieval systems, right? So because when we're really dealing with chatbots or conversational systems, there are retrieval, that is you're seeking for information, but there's also generative aspect of it, because that's where natural language understanding plays a big role, and that's how me as a human sitting on the other side would understand and contextualize and generate the right kind of response that is out there. From the current systems, what we have seen was it works great for retrieval systems. So these chatbots are like an extension to your search, so to speak, making it much more interactive. But really for a real problem solving or something like that, it has to be generative. And we found generative models not working very well. And how do you guys see that, we're going to go all out and chatbots are going to be that effective, or they're just going to be these extension-based IR models out there? So just would love to get your thoughts on this. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess, so I guess in some cases they are kind of more information retrieval-based use cases where you start with a query specifying what you're looking for, maybe I would like a sweater, and then in a conversational flow you can kind of narrow down those responses by following up with, oh, I actually want one that's blue, I actually want one that's this size. So I think that there is kind of interaction component that improves retrieval models, but I do think that chatbots are also being used for other use cases. For example, it can be used for device control, or it can be used to come up with more intelligent responses to questions, even like solving simple math problems, or for placing orders at a restaurant and having that order delivered. So I think, yeah, I guess the use cases right now are simpler than what they could be in the future, but I think there is kind of a little bit of a variation already beyond just information retrieval.
Reinforcement learning is showing progress in what you might call problem solving instead of this discriminatory approaches to doing things. That requires huge amounts of data. So if you're looking at some of these game solving, you have really hardcore hardware that's specifically built to do these operations, and usually a physics simulator or a game simulator hooked up to that, feeding huge amounts of data into the model. So I would say that solving these problems well requires a lot more data than solving a discriminative problem, or solving a problem with a discriminative model.
Questions? Yeah. So Chatbot is pretty good, give you a lot of information, helping you to interact with people, but it's software. So that definitely have some software, maybe the security holds some problem. So what kind of security protection that you have on this chatbot in case that people come in and give you the wrong intention, give you the wrong information, or the interaction between people give you wrong thing. So what kind of the security protection that you provide into the chatbot?
So this question could go a few different ways. So one is if the person provides information that should not be in the logs, like personally identifiable information when it shouldn't be there. So we have something called data loss prevention, which is an app to essentially find things that are PII and redact it, but then also keep tokens such that if that information is needed to like certain appropriate people, that can be found. So that's one way to handle security and people providing information they shouldn't be providing to the chatbot.
Same at Slack, DLP is what's mostly used. I would say like other things are just reminding folks of the scopes they're using, right? So if it's like this bot's going to read all of your channels in Slack, like continuously reminding that, like the user of that, especially if they're like going to be providing sensitive information or it's a bot rooted in insurance or healthcare or something that they may need just like that constant communication of a warning.
I'm working with a team who's trying to create a global lost and found service, and the chatbots would be quite ideal for that, except that the only channel that's ubiquitously available is SMS, and that's quite expensive, 5 cents, 5.5 cents for each text to Colombia. What can one do? What kind of sort of a universal interface exists in order to create a chatbot where somebody can come up to it and start interacting with it?
So I've definitely seen on the investment side, there are startups who are trying to tackle this problem, and what they do, they offer you develop it once, and then they handle the integration, and they make your bot available in Slack, in Microsoft Teams, in Facebook Workplace. So that's kind of the direction. But I agree with you, it's usually where you have people using the channel most. If it's Skype they use, they want to use the bot there. So some companies go channel by channel, but the direction I'm seeing, at least from the startups who are developing new technologies, that they want you to develop it once and then make it available in all the channels.
So these people that only have access to SMS, would they sometimes have access to Wi-Fi occasionally?
Most of them have data.
Most of them have data. Yeah. Well, so then potentially you could do something through that instead of through SMS. Is the issue like hosting a service, or what is the issue?
No, the issue is that these things will be printed on very small pieces of paper, right? And we don't want to have to go to a website, so it's nice to have a phone number, and apps are hard to download. So a phone number is nice and convenient, and it'd be nice to be able to. If WhatsApp were universal, would be great.
Hi. Thanks for a wonderful discussion. I think this is really great. Like you rightly said, this is very early days for chatbots. I would like to ask if any of you have any experience dealing with protecting underage audience on chatbot, because there is actually a big consideration for that kind of audience. And at the same time, some thoughts on accessibility. Obviously, it is a great avenue for people who can't physically move their hands, but then other kinds of accessibility also might come into play. So on both fronts, if you have any thoughts, I'd be grateful if you can. Thanks.
Parents of older children used to worry about screen time. Parents of younger children worry about their child's unnatural relationship with Alexa. Go ahead.
Well, I would say in terms of accessibility, there are different types of accessibility needs. So before I mentioned vision, hearing, and motion difficulties, there are also cognitive issues with accessibility. So different people might have different levels of how they can understand things and how they can interact with the bot. So I would say that the bot being able to produce language at the right level, so that someone that's a very sophisticated user is not frustrated, but someone that needs things that are a little simpler can also be provided with what they need. And whether that's all in one bot or splitting and routing based on the needs, that is an important thing.
Yeah, I think one area is doing ASR, speech recognition, where sometimes it may be harder for those systems to get what children are saying right versus an adult, and also obviously variations on accents as well, and speech patterns. So I think that's one area where there's a lot of work that can be done to improve those models and to really tune your language models to be able to understand variations of language. So when you limit your language model to a specific domain, you can kind of retune it so it gets that domain language better, but it also kind of expands the variation of language that it can understand. And I think that can help in some cases with accessibility.
Let me start with a quick comment on one of the previous questions. Actually, group by itself is SQL. Someone who doesn't know SQL will not use the phrase group by in a sentence. So that's a fun comment. But here's my quick question. Actually, do you have the top use cases that chatbots actually improve a company's bottom line? What are these use cases, please?
Yeah, I guess I don't know if I've seen metrics on exactly how much a chatbot is adding value, but just in terms of kind of softer metrics, I think that one, having a chatbot that's available to enterprise customers, if that works really well, can be useful for certain companies. So for example, we worked with Starbucks at MindMeld for the coffee ordering use case, and I think a lot of people at Starbucks will have crazy orders that have 5 different variations of what the drink originally was. And if you add in a couple stacks to the side, when you're going through the button taps on the app, that can take 20 taps to get your order right. But when you're saying it with voice, you can say that all in one query, and it gets it right with high accuracy. And a lot of times when you're grabbing a coffee, you're maybe running to work or you're on your way to something, so being able to tell the app something and then pick it up on your way is a use case that would be useful. And I think right now we're working in the meeting room use case, and I think that anytime you can limit the amount of time it takes to complete some transaction, that's inherently adding value in some way, because users will tend to gravitate towards that use case if it's actually improving efficiency rather than being equivalent or even taking longer.
Yes, and I would like to add to what Arushi mentioned. For SAP, for example, we did a bot for Slack, and this bot was a Concur bot. So think of travel and expenses. Instead of you spending, I don't know, 1 hour after you've been to a conference, that's actually valuable time. Let's say you're working in engineering at Facebook, that's very valuable time. You would just use this bot and would just reduce that time significantly. So right now we're seeing that reduction in time, and then what does that mean in terms of a monetary value?
And I think that this sort of situation, if you have, like for instance, back-end or back office situations where the user has a task that they do pretty infrequently. So at Google, we have security that happens magically and we don't have to handle certs ourselves, but out in like many companies in the rest of the world, people have to handle certs themselves. Like you have to go into Microsoft Outlook and like install the certs. And you have to do that infrequently enough that you forget how to do it. So if you can somehow have some automation or have the bot help you to do this task that you do infrequently enough to always forget how it's done, then that can save you in terms of time, and it can also save you in terms of mistakes. Like for instance, certs being installed improperly.
Yes, and in terms of, since we had our wonderful introduction from Lancôme or like L'Oreal, they've also launched bots now, and the reason is not just because us millennials like them, is because via this conversation it finds out more about your preferences, and then it suggests a product which has a lot higher chance of you buying that product. So then product discovery and cross-selling is something that we're seeing bots being used for.
And one final thing I'll tack on to this is I think chatbots are really fascinating, mostly because they take sort of like a workflow that would otherwise be siloed in software. Like sometimes they place it in a messaging service like Slack, and it really creates visibility of a workflow, and a lot of people can kind of chime in. So a really common one that we see in like our workspaces are customer support. So if someone brings in a customer support ticket and there's an issue, it's normally not just customer support like within one software. Then if it was not a chatbot, it would be like, okay, let me email or copy and paste this ticket, or let me take a screenshot and then loop in sales, and then they'll send it to product and what have you. And I think bringing in sort of a chatbot that can pipe in a lot of information that multiple people can see at once, like in a messaging platform like Slack, saves a ton of time and creates a lot of collaboration. And in the end, hopefully, solves that customer's problem faster.
Yeah, so I come from the design side of the house, and I try to use Slack actually in the front office, I guess you could say. And the problem we see is it just doesn't fit in the flow of work, right? So what are you ladies thinking? How can we make this so seamless that it feels natural? Because right now I have to work to get to Slack, and I have to Slack others, and it doesn't fit seamlessly in how I work. Maybe in a customer service scenario that's closer, but even I used to work in inside sales to make that conscious effort to have a joint collaboration session on this, on a bot, on a chat session, is hard work. And you're making me do extra work. So I think a lot of the chats are not getting adopted because it just doesn't fit.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point, and that is, I think there's always a lot of focus on AI and NLP and kind of the technical side of things, as there should be, but where I hear a lot of demand from devs is actually around like best practices for design. So it's what are the do's and don'ts of voice and tone and introductory experiences and logos and all of these so-called fuzzy things that are so crucial to make it like a really pleasant experience for, yes, folks that are technically fluent, but then also folks that may not be as technically fluent. Slack made an effort to try and like solve this gap by producing some blueprints that we also host on our api.slack.com site. So when people are kind of looking at the foundational elements of tools and libraries, they can also say, how can I make this a really holistic experience? Like, how can I really serve the customer? And think about what time zones are they in? Is this on mobile or desktop? Again, are they technically fluent or not? What function are they in? Like, those are all really important questions to think through, not just the scripting and things of that nature. So we're getting there. I think, like, again, the more sort of experiments we have, the more we can add to sort of like blueprints and guidelines like that, but it's early days.
So, as I understand it, all of you are using models of English, and I'm wondering, what are you doing for all the other languages? And do you have separate mechanisms in place for releasing chatbots to other languages, or can you deal with multiple languages already? And have you considered using model-free methods instead for models?
Yeah, definitely. I think that moving towards chatbots in other languages is definitely a big priority. It's kind of on the next step page. We haven't yet implemented models for other languages, but we've just kind of run some in-house experiments where we translate all of our queries and try running through that, and it actually works decently well as an initial pass, but obviously to get all the nuances of the language, we need to have significantly more data generated in that language. And I think it also depends on what language you're translating to, because certain languages have very similar language patterns as English, but other ones are very different. And so I think the type of models that you would choose to work may shift as you shift languages. I think another area that might be interesting to look into is training models and kind of on kind of a language-free state where you kind of map all languages to some sort of semantic vector and train your models on that intermediate vector. That could be an interesting approach if you're trying to get one model to work on multiple languages, but I think that's still an area to be explored.
So there's transfer learning is something that you can possibly use if you train in one language and then have a smaller corpora for something else, then you can get some of the impact for the data that you already have.
Question?
Thanks. So a few years ago, we had a lot of, or a proliferation of chatbot companies, right? A lot of money got invested. They haven't really panned out. how would you characterize what differentiates this next generation of chatbot companies?
So I would say AI is different now than in the late 90s, right? So what has happened since then? Huge amounts of compute have become available, huge data sets. Some change to the math in the neural networks, and suddenly you are able to have much, much more complex models that can really learn representations and as a result hit performance that we couldn't hit before.
Also, just like more generally, the rise of like messaging platforms. I know I'm biased, but I think there are, like, whether it's Teams or Slack or Workplace or whatever, those provide really good testing grounds for really experimental workflows with chatbots. But it's also just like very organic and seamless because people, they already have messaging layers, and interacting with those chatbots is like a step forward. And so I think as long as people are living there and customers are like going there, if chatbots can kind of add a layer of productivity to that, I think they eminently find more value.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I wanted to know if any of your companies are using sentimental analysis in developing your chatbot, and if so, what kind of methods have you explored or are currently using?
So I'll respond from the dialogue flow side. So right now we have several products that developers can put together if they so wish. So Dialogflow right now has a way for you to say whether or not a response to a query made sense. But there's also natural language, and there's a natural language API. So if you wanted to, as a developer, what you could do is do some analysis of what the response is to figure out something about the sentiment, and then automatically have some labeling in order to say this is where things started to go wrong.
Yeah, to add to that, I think one thing that's not fully developed, but just kind of an idea that's been tossed around, is doing sentiment analysis on the conversation to see if there's a turning point where the user is starting to get frustrated at the chatbot. So you know that even in the live conversation, you can start responding back, kind of like resetting the page, shifting gears, kind of guiding users back to the core use cases once you start detecting that frustration. Or in some cases, like customer support, you can transfer people over to a live agent instead of using the chatbot component.
I've been looking at a meeting room assistant, so similar to kind of what SparkRoom is doing. And I've noticed that if I'm in an airport or a busy, noisy setting, that the assistant that I have on the WebEx has issues picking up what's being said during the meeting, just because of all the static noise and other people talking, maybe because of accents as well. So are there anything being done to sort of address that issue, or curious to sort of get your thoughts, especially you, Arushi?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially with voice interfaces, the first step of anything is doing speech recognition. And when you're in noisy meeting rooms, that can be very hard to do. There are custom ASRs that we can start looking into that are better at meeting room scenarios where there's more far-field audio. Another solution with Cisco is just putting more microphones in a meeting room to solve problems with hardware. And I think another thing is, again, when you start being able to narrow down your use cases and tuning down your language model so you're not trying to recognize in a very generic sense of things, you can kind of have a broader set of phonemes that map to the same words, and you can, in that way, start filtering out some more noise by narrowing down the scope of your language model. It's definitely an unsolved problem and something that's still being worked on, but there's kind of different directions and areas to move towards to try to solve it.
Maybe I'll ask the concluding question. Any thoughts? We talked about privacy and security. Any other thoughts on social, ethical issues around chatbots? We talked about children also, outside of that.
So I would say fairness is an issue. if you have a large training set, but it is in some segment of your population, it doesn't have very much data, you're going to really perform poorly with that segment of the population. So making sure that you're not somehow giving one underrepresented part of the population a really bad experience is important.
Yeah, one area that we've been actively working on currently is in the meeting rooms use cases, being able to call people. And you have to make sure that you can call someone with any type of name, no matter what ethnicity they are or whether their name is very uncommon. And that's something that's very hard to get right, proper names in a very generic ASR setting. So doing ASR name correction based on your org and based on team interactions and based on the type of accents that you're expecting from users in that room can really help increase your kind of diversity in the names that you can capture, right? And make sure you're not biasing against names from different origins or names that may be less common.
I would say along the sort of security and data lines, actually just a lot of people use chatbots in a one-to-one setting, so like in a DM or in an assistant sort of methodology, but in Slack, a lot of them are one-to-many. So a bot can be in a public channel, and there are concerns and sort of best practices around like, okay, if someone shares, like asks to see a contract or a deal value or something of that nature, that can be really, really sensitive information that maybe you don't want like the hundreds of people in that Slack channel to see. And so I think there's a long way to go with chatbots on like, you know, when to know how you can summon like a specific bot and how they can kind of filter information and of how they're showing that information depending upon who's in what channel, et cetera. And a lot of the bots aren't smart enough to do that right now. It's kind of a one-size-fits-all. So displaying information in certain different contexts is something that needs to be improved.
And with the new GDPR regulations, I think that's also very important that they should comply with that if they want adoption in the enterprise.
Great. I'd like to thank SAP, Ram, and gang for hosting us today. and this awesome team of Oana for moderating, and Merrielle, and Arushi, and Tessa. We really appreciate your being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.